I'm going live in 20 seconds. Hello, everyone, and welcome to I Am Remarkable Week 2022. I Am Remarkable is a global movement that empowers everyone with a focus on women and underrepresented groups to celebrate their achievements in the workplace and beyond. To date, over 400,000 people have taken part in the workshops across 170 countries and over 1,000 companies. This year, we're celebrating our third I Am Remarkable Week globally, which is the highlight event of our year, where we celebrate all things remarkable. Now, the week is running from today all the way through to the 30th, and you can join all the sessions through our website at g.co/IamRemarkable/week. There are so many fantastic sessions for you to join, including today with Tom Daly and later with Venus Williams. One of the most exciting parts of I Am Remarkable Week are the panel sessions, and I'm honored to be leading this conversation today around how to operate with empathy and resilience while continuing to build your own brand now that so many of us live in a hybrid working world. We're going to have about 45 minutes for discussion with the panelists before moving into a live Q&A. So if you are watching live, please share your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. My name is Kerry Jacobs. I'm a long-term Googler. I work in the resilience space in our people development part of the organization at Google. I also run a program at Google called Leading with Empathy. So I feel like I'm a good person to moderate today's panel. I identify as a straight, white, cisgendered female. And I always say that because it's important for you to know that my experience of the world has been through that lens. Let me introduce our panelists. I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about your story and why this topic matters so much to you. Let me come to you first, Dr. Kenza.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Very excited for this discussion. As you said, my name is Kenza Gunter. I am a clinical and sports psychologist based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. And in terms of what I do, what that basically means is that I work at the intersection of mental health, mental performance, sport, and culture. And when you ask, why this topic? Why was I attracted to this topic? And I think my simple answer is because we're all remarkable, but I don't know if we often or always see that in ourselves. And so in the work that I do, I strive to help people get out of their own way, if you will, and move in the direction that they want to in their lives. And I think helping them recognize their internal strengths, their internal gifts, and helping them understand the light that shines within them to help them on that journey is really important. And I think that's what makes them remarkable, and hence what brings me to this conversation.
I love that. Thank you so much for being with us. Faisal, how about you?
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I want to say it's an absolute privilege to be here on this panel and having this discussion with all of you today. My name is Faisal. I am a program manager at Google. I manage a team when we build artificial intelligence systems. I'm also disabled. 20 years ago, I broke my neck and I have full paralysis from my shoulder blades down with limited movement in my arms and my hands. So I certainly bring a unique perspective to this conversation, and I'm very excited to share my experience during the pandemic and how it shaped my views for hybrid working and remote working as well. So really looking forward to the discussions today. Thank you very much.
We're so lucky to have you, Faisal. Thank you. And Major General Mary Kay.
It's wonderful to be here, and I am thrilled to be with all of you. I spent 36 years in the U.S. Army. doing things that meant you had to be fully present all the time. So even that transition was something I was still working on as the pandemic began, and then it was total isolation. So for someone who has been there, then suddenly nowhere, I found myself beginning to be anxious about how hard it would be to come back. Not only that, but I'd have to wear real clothes again. I'd have to figure out how to talk again. I'd have to see every store you go in is different. So I've had some anxieties as the pandemic has ended, and I enjoy talking about those because I think we're still in transition time. But I'm happy to be here.
And now you get to spend more time with your dogs, which is always a plus, right?
For them it is, yes.
Well, thank you for all of you for being here. What a wide variety of perspectives that you afford us. There's a lot of words in the title of our topic today, so just wanted to quickly do some definitions. And I'd love to know if you have others for these. But to me, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Resilience, as we describe it at Google, is our ability to respond to and recover from stress. And just for everyone to know, hybrid, in the context of the conversation we're having today, is not a car. Hybrid is the work environment we find ourselves in, where some of it is in the office and some of it is at home for some of us. So we will be talking a lot about working from home and hybrid today. And I wanted to call out that the ability to even do that is an unbelievable privilege that's not afforded to everyone. My life before COVID involved a lot of red-eye flights, a lot of travel, a lot of mum guilt for not being with my kids. I've been very lucky because as a Google employee, I've been able to work from home for the last 2.5 years. And for me, my personal experience is that it's been a bit of a blessing. I've been much more involved with my family's life. I've slept better. My social anxiety has come right down. And, you know, as someone living with mental health issues, it's just been easier for me. But every single one of us is different and has a different experience. So how have you personally had to adapt and develop your working styles during and post-pandemic? Faisal, let me come to you first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kerry. So the pandemic was incredibly beneficial for my professional life, and it allowed me to manage my energy levels in two main ways. Firstly, the obvious one in that I didn't have to commute, the horrendous commute into London every day. But secondly, and more importantly, I didn't have to constantly accommodate individuals' biases towards my physical disability. So at the start of the pandemic, the team restructured. We had a couple of people who left, and I got a new role, which was to manage an engineering team in India and in Poland. And I had customers in North America and Europe primarily, and some in South America and the APAC region. So a global role. And it was all online. So we were forced to collaborate, to make connections, build networks, execute, deliver on our promises. And all of these things played to my strength. And it was incredibly refreshing and liberating because nobody could see that I was in a wheelchair. So I didn't really have to deal with how people will perceive me and whether I can deliver on my promises. So how did I adapt? Well, I embraced the situation. I looked at it as an opportunity, and I realized that individuals were isolated and really wanted to talk to people. So I saw that as an opportunity, and I wasn't afraid to reach out and make connections and talk to people, knowing that I was free from judgment because people couldn't see me and my physicality. And so that certainly played very well into my professional life. Post-pandemic, all of those things and all of those skills that I developed during the pandemic, I certainly carried on. And so it's working very well for me, and I'm very happy with the way things turned out.
Well, I'm sorry it took a global pandemic to help you find that liberation, but that's a fascinating perspective. Thank you so much. Dr. Kenza.
I definitely appreciate hearing Faisal's experience moving through the pandemic. And I think about my own experience and how it impacted my personal life. And as a therapist who was used to sitting face to face with people in an office, The pandemic was very disruptive initially to my professional work. In fact, I even asked the question, can I continue to do this work in a virtual setting? Can I continue to be with people without being with people? Right. And initially, I had clients who did not want to engage in teletherapy services. And I will admit, I too had a bias for in-person therapy prior to the pandemic. All of my work was done in person, whether it was individual work, consulting with teams, working with organizations, providing presentations, everything was done in person. And so to instantly be in a moment where that's not available was really challenging. And so had to make a really quick adjustment to offering services in a digital space and trusting that that connection could exist, could continue, and that work could still be done. And I'm grateful to say that I learned very quickly that the medium may matter, but the connection can still exist. And there is power in the connection, even beyond being in person. And so still being able to offer support, assistance, even in a digital platform with a virtual space, I think was eye-opening for me. So I think it expanded my idea of what help could look like, how help could be delivered. And I think that was really powerful. And it has continued post-pandemic because now I still work in a hybrid situation where there are some that prefer to be online and others that would like to come in person. And I think just understanding that there is more than one way to offer assistance is a big lesson that I took from how my professional life was impacted during this time.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I love that you've been able to continue some of it now that hopefully life is getting more back to normal or some kind of normal. Mary Kay, how about you? How's your life changed? You mentioned that it changed dramatically.
Well, certainly in some of the same ways as Faisal and Kenza said, I was able to adapt, and it made me slow down and focus, which I hadn't done before. I had run from one thing to another as a pace I was used to. At the beginning of the pandemic in February of 2020, I signed a contract with a publisher to write a book about women in World War II. And then everything shut down. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't talk to anyone. Museums wouldn't return my calls, or libraries, or anyone. And so I started buying books online and doing my own research in depth, going back to that time rather than relying on someone else's words. So it focused me. And at the same time it slowed me down, the publisher wanted the completed manuscript in 2 months. I had written nothing. So I spent 2 months totally focused on one thing. I don't think I've ever done that. And having that time to focus and be immersed, I think was a revelation for me in getting it done, getting it together, and learning from the people I was writing about. So now I feel like I know them. They were my best friends for those 2 years.
I can't think of anyone better to spend time with than the women who contributed to World War II. I'm glad you had their company. Thank you all. I think everything that you just said there demonstrated that each of us have such a different experience of what we've gone through and what now we continue to live through. So, you know, we have so many variables as we come back to a hybrid working environment. Whether you're a parent, whether you're not a parent, your personality type, are you a caregiver? Are you a boss? How long have you been with your company? What's your status? What's your commute? What's your visa status? There are so many things for leaders to consider. And that's what I want to ask you about now. When you layer onto the fact that for so many underrepresented groups or historically excluded groups is my preferred term, like Faisal said, the ability to work from home gave a lot of people the chance to really thrive because they were not having to deal with the day-to-day racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, misogyny, pick your phobia that they did when they had to be in the office every single day. What would your advice be for leaders now that they come back and they are working or trying to organize hybrid working environments? How can you get them to consider all perspectives? And not just the fact that a lot of people are really eager to get back and be with their colleagues and their customers, but that's not the case for everyone. Faisal, what do you think about that?
Well, I certainly think at its essence is listening to the people that you manage. and understanding their perspectives and realizing that we all provide value to the workplace. I think there's an element of education as well for managers to understand, what individuals go through when it comes to their own race or disability or their own sex. So I think there's a level of education as well. So yeah, that's my perspective on that.
Thank you. Mary Kay.
One of the things I think that is most important for leaders as we transition from the pandemic through this liminal time to what's next is to listen. Many people, as Faisal said, do not want to change, don't want to come back, or want to come back in different ways. And we're seeing that some companies are saying everyone comes back now. We never go back to the way things were after a major disruptive event in the world. We go forward and in different ways. And so it's listening to people and having their inputs. This is how we would like to do it. Some companies are having events. Well, you don't have to come back except on Wednesday and Thursday, and then we'll have a happy hour. Well, for those who are parents with young children, they don't want to go to happy hour. They want to go home. And so this doesn't work for everyone. So I think having flexibility combined with empathy is the only way that we can make the change that we need to keep everyone engaged at work and not only make a living, but have a life.
Both of you have called out listening. I couldn't agree more. What do you think, Dr. Kenza? You work with a lot of leaders.
The phrase that came to mind when you asked the question of what do leaders need to do and how can they be empathetic in this moment, the phrase that came to mind was they have to do it with intention. It has to be intentional because the reality is, even prior to the pandemic, everyone in our workspaces had a different set of circumstances, had a different set of experiences, brought the cultural identities that make up who they are to the workplace with them. That has not changed. What's changed is our awareness of it and our thoughts about how we need to be intentional about including that into our assessment of what's happening with our colleagues and what's happening in our workplaces. But people have always held cultural identities. We've always needed to be empathic. And I think historically, we've labeled things like empathy and listening and being flexible as it relates to engaging with our colleagues as soft skills. And I would label them as human skills. And I think that's truly what we need. In addition to education and listening and having that flexibility, we have to do all of that with intention. And for the leaders, I would also say, we have to recognize that leaders are walking through this transitional moment too. So in addition to being in a position of having to create space for their team and to lead and guide their team, they're also trying to navigate the very same challenges and adversities that we're all facing. And so I think overall, grace is really important. And for leaders to acknowledge when they may need assistance and to be authentic with their team so that there is a sense they're all in it together. I think those are powerful tools to help them manage this moment.
I agree. Thank you, Dr. Kenza, especially for calling out that these are human skills. Can I just ask you a follow-up question? Obviously, we don't have it. Everyone is trying these new models. You know, do you come into work on a Tuesday and a Wednesday? You know, who stays home, who can come in? I don't think we've reached the perfect idea of how this works, and I don't know if we ever will. But how would you advise leaders to continually assess what's working and what isn't in this hybrid world?
I would say back to the notion of listening and having space for open conversation to get feedback, right? And feedback, let me be clear, is not just about what's not working well, but the feedback needs to include what is working well, because there may be some things that we're doing that are really helpful. But you're right, I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to hybrid work or returning to the office. And I also think that living in the space of hybrid work is a process. So there is no destination that we're striving for, but it is continuing to understand the needs of the people that we're working with and to try to be responsive to that, right? And that requires flexibility, listening. It also requires just being open. being open to the fact that there may be a different way of doing things that does not jeopardize our productivity, that still allows more room for our people to feel like they're cared for and heard. Like there's room for both of those. And getting there may look different than what we're doing now, but that's okay, because different is not bad. Different does not mean we're doing something wrong. Different just means it's not what we're doing now. And so we have to keep being open.
I love that. It can be hard for businesses to admit that there isn't a final destination. You know, it can be really hard for people to accept that.
Absolutely. But let's just look at the past 2.5 years.
Exactly.
We did not choose to go home and work remotely, right? The world pushed us into a position where that's where we were, and we adapted. So I think we also should give ourselves some credit that we can adapt as we keep moving forward.
I absolutely agree. Do either of you have any comments to add to that?
One that we have a terrible term in the Army. It's called management by walking around, which means you continually circulate through your teams, through the people in your various offices, because we have so many companies now that are global, like Google, like Carfax. So there are always people who are going to be remote, and you might only see them once a year at a conference or so. So there's a continual need to keep conversation, touch points, and relationships to keep them fresh and to keep it going. And I think that we go back and forth between virtual space and physical space. And we need to get better at the ways in which we do this. And virtual space still has to improve. So one of the things I talk about is if you take a look at Zoom or even Google Meet or any of these other platforms, they're still primitive. And they're not at the point where they're serving us the way we want them to yet. But they will get there. They're still at the Model T Ford stage, but they'll get better.
Although I did try to join today with my bunny ears in the remote background, and then I thought it was inappropriate. Faisal.
There is a disconnect between what management perceives as being productive and what is actually happening on the ground. And the pandemic and people working at home showed that we were actually incredibly productive. So I think we need to have a different way of measuring productivity in order to calm managers' fears about whether we are performing or we're not performing. Saying that, I mean, working from home is an exhausting thing. You are waking up, going to your computer, working 10 hours a day, having lunch at your desk, and you're having meetings constantly. And it's not a very healthy way of living a professional life. So certainly, I think there are two things managers really need to understand and measure productivity on an online world. But we do also need to recognize that, working online and talking to your computer screen, having a relationship with your computer is not a healthy thing to do either. So going forward, we certainly do need to accommodate people's needs and accommodate managers' needs as well and measure productivity differently.
Yeah, Faisal, you and I were talking yesterday. There's a new study that just came out from Microsoft saying that there's a disconnect between individual contributors feeling like they're being super productive in a hybrid environment and managers having a different view. So you're right, the lens is different. I appreciate that take from all of you. Thank you. Continuing on that theme, but now down at the individual level, I Am Remarkable is all about making sure that we can talk with confidence about our accomplishments in the workplace. And I do think that it can be very challenging to think about how we're being positioned and how we're being perceived when we're in a hybrid environment. Perhaps you're showing up and you're the only person in your team who's joining remotely, for example, and everyone else is sitting in a room. Or half of you are online and half of you aren't. When it comes to personal brand, how are you adapting, or how would you advise those of us watching to make sure that it isn't impacted by things that I am already seeing, like presenteeism, for example? The ability to be visible in the office when your boss is there. And then for those people who are working remotely feeling like they're at a huge disadvantage because they're not able to have those off-the-cuff conversations or be seen as much as those who are in the office. So when it comes to your personal brand and connections and relationships, how can we make sure that those aren't damaged? Or how can we leverage this new world that we're living in to make sure that those continue to thrive. Dr. Kenza, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's challenging. When I think about personal brand, what I think of is how a person shows up and kind of the imprint that they leave. So when that person's not around, their brand is the impression that's left with people in their absence. And so I think in some ways, what we can control is how we show up, right? Whether it's in the virtual space or whether it's in person, controlling kind of how we show up, how we engage, how we contribute. But that's all we can actually control. We truly can't control how people are perceiving me being present in the office or not present in the office. And I think that's a very real factor that we have to bring to this conversation, because it's not exclusively in the control of the person to control how they're being perceived. And so I think when we are thinking about flexibility and we're thinking about empathy, we have to go beyond having conversations about it and put it into action. So back to what Faisal was saying, it may be thinking about how we can rework the way in which we're defining productivity, rework the way in which we are engaging in the workplace to include a variety of options that allows for those who are present and those who are remote to have the same or similar opportunities to engage. So we may have some group contexts where we're in a virtual space. We may also have more individual meetings so that people who are making those determinations and whose impression of the person impacts their work life very directly can have more engagement with that person, because it's incredibly difficult for some to engage in a social setting. It's incredibly difficult for some to engage virtually. And we don't want to penalize people because the method in which we are engaging is challenging for them. So really being intentional about that flexibility, not just as it relates to can they be present or remote, but how we even engage and how we are evaluating a person's contribution. We really need to expand how we think about that to be more inclusive of the ways in which we're all showing up at the workplace now.
No easy feat, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you're talking again about completely rethinking how we do something.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Faisal, how, you mentioned at the beginning that you're in a wheelchair and yet that's invisible to us on this call today. How do you think about how people are perceiving you, and how different has it been, and what lessons can we take from that when it comes to, your brand?
So for me, personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So perception of the individual is incredibly important, because big decisions are made about you and your career and your life when you're not in that room. And so this is a very personal thing to me. When I was going into the pandemic, the perception of me as an employee wasn't great. But being online enabled that change to change that tanker 180 degrees in the Indian Ocean. Because I didn't have to deal with people's inherent biases because they weren't seeing my physicality. But the other reason why it enabled change was because I had a strong desire to change the perception of me. And so knowing that people were willing to talk during the pandemic, I took advantage of that. I found a great mentor who was brutally honest with me and gave me certain things to do. One of them was to make it very clear what my roles and responsibilities are in terms of managing my team and what I had to do. And then going above and beyond and delivering more than what was expected of me once I'd agreed onto that. The second thing that I had to do was learn how to market myself as well. When you're working remotely, your boss is in another country and his boss is in another country and so on. So how do they know what is your contribution? So self-promotion, sincere self-promotion, self-marketing, these are all really important things when it comes to, changing perception or promoting your perception. So when it comes to the hybrid world, I think there are great opportunities to promote your brand and to change your perception if you want to. Again, it comes down to this point that people are really, really willing to talk and reach out, and so it's about making connections and about making relationships and seeing how you can help those people and how they can help you as well. So yeah, that's my experience of perception and personal brand during the pandemic.
I really appreciate you talking about the work that you've done on yourself, But I do think it's important that we all listen to the first part of your answer, which is quite sobering for those of us who aren't managing a disability to remember. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in the majority population or the overrepresented population at every point to remember that, you know, there are people for whom this is more challenging. I have a colleague who went through a pregnancy during COVID, and because we can only see shoulders and head, was able to not tell a lot of people that she was pregnant. And when I asked her to compare her experience of that pregnancy to one that had been much more visible, she felt that she was afforded so many more opportunities than she was the first time around, simply because of even unconscious bias of like, hey, we better not give her put too much on her plate because she might not be able to manage. So it is really fascinating. Mary Kay, the whole concept of branding and self-promotion, I don't even know how that lands in an army world, but what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think we all project who we are in whatever setting. And I think that's what we've been talking about so far. But certainly for me, in any setting I'm in, part of the brand that I project is to try and cut any, I think, issues of anxiety, or try to make things more comfortable for people, particularly in situations that can be difficult. And I use humor for that a lot. I project part of my brand is, if I'm going to speak, people know that I will say something that is relevant, that contributes, and it will be said with just enough humor to perhaps break the tension in some of these settings that we have. And when you talk about new people, so we come back from the pandemic and there are new people in a work setting and they don't know the you that others did before, then you have to start over with, this is who I am, this is what I'm like. And I do that in initial meetings where there are new people, always. This is what I'm like. I will make you laugh. And then you will listen to me because you will see that I am down to earth. And that has worked very well for me, particularly in settings where you can walk in and you can tell by body language that perhaps you might not be welcome, or what are you doing here? What can you contribute? And you let people know you feel that. You can feel what they're projecting towards you. And then you can tell them, now you're going to listen to me, and here's why.
Spoken with such gravitas. I love it. Thank you. Kenza, I know you had more thoughts on this topic.
I just had one thing that I want to say, because as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking we haven't said one thing out loud, and that's that we all need to check our biases and check our privileges. Like, that's a part of moving forward in this space, and quite frankly, in any space, right? We need to really be conscious of leaving room to understand who a person is based on our engagement, not based on our assumptions, right? And the other really big word that comes to mind for me is humility. I know we've talked about empathy as being kindness and being able to understand and sense another person's feelings, but I think humility is also understanding that multiple truths coexist. I'm the expert in my experience, you're the expert in your experience, and we have to leave room for both. One is not more important than the other. We have to have a level of humility to allow space for those multiple experiences to coexist even in our workplace. And I think that requires us to check some of our privileges and biases at the door continuously. So going back to that education.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that. And actually, on that point of privilege, I do want to take that a little further with regards to the privilege of being able to work in a work from home or hybrid environment, which I know is not something everyone has. And I'm curious, we have a lot of people joining this call today who probably have never had and will never have the opportunity to work in a hybrid environment. If you are a chef, if you're working in a kitchen, if you're in the armed services, you don't get to do that sitting in front of your computer, whereas I do have that ability. So in an organization where you are always going to have some who can and some who can't, I have to admit, sometimes it feels a little indulgent for us to be even having this conversation. How do we go about making sure, and this is on all of us, it's all our responsibilities, not just our leaders. How do we go about that in a world that is more hybrid for some? We ensure that workplaces are completely equitable and we're not moving into a divided them and us situation. Kenza, what do you think about that?
I think there's so much power in naming realities. So I think sometimes just naming that as a fact demonstrates an awareness that there are different experiences, demonstrates an awareness that some are not able to work from home and do not have the liberty and the luxury of this hybrid conversation. I think naming it. And then I do think it's continuing to be responsive to the needs, understanding that what one group needs may be different than what another group needs. So equity does not necessarily mean that we do the same thing for all, right? But it means that we're responsive in a way that allows similar opportunity for all in this space. And I think that is a big differentiating factor that we have to understand. Equity doesn't mean same. It means fair. And what's needed for people to have a fair chance and a fair opportunity may look different. And we have to, again, be open to doing what's difficult. I know we've said a lot of times, it's not easy to do the things that we're talking about, but the fact that it's not easy doesn't mean it's not possible, right? And so we have to be conscious of that.
Very much so. Faisal, what are your thoughts on this? Because we work at a company at Google where some of our staff just don't have the option of working from home.
I think it's acknowledging the privilege and respecting the opportunity, right? You know, we work in an organization that has multiple roles, as you said, you know, everything from facilities to the engineers and everything in between. And all of us have a very important role to play for the organization. And it's about treating every individual in the organization with respect and understanding that they have their own limitations in the way that they work and their own desires and in the way they work. So, and I think that underlines what it means to acknowledge and respect the privilege that we have in working for this type of organization.
Mary Kay.
And I think there's a sensitivity there too. Certainly, I've worked in multinational organizations where each group within that organization had a different work life. Certain holidays were different for each group. If you were military, you got to take off time to go get a haircut, whereas the civilians couldn't do that. So there was always a little bit of, well, they get to do this and I don't. And so it's the sensitivity to understanding the natural human feelings about, I wish I could do that too. And then saying, then how do we make this fair for you? What would that seem like to you? And getting input. Again, it's back to listening and saying, we realize you're a chef or a truck driver and you can't have that kind of a schedule. But what we'd like to do instead is offer you longer days for a few days and then more days off. How can we make this work for you in a better way than what you saw before or what you experienced before?
What great advice. I want to take advantage of the four of you being here with all of your knowledge. You've talked a lot today about listening and leaders having to listen, and we all have to listen to each other. But what are we listening to, right? For a lot of women or people from underrepresented, historically excluded groups, it can be challenging to just speak up and share that actually, I don't feel comfortable coming into an office where people aren't wearing masks. I don't feel comfortable going back to a world where I don't get to put my kids to bed at night, you know, and so many other things. What advice would you have, especially when people are worried about perception, about being honest and letting your needs be heard? Dr. Kenza, I think you probably have some brilliant advice on this.
The first thing that comes to mind to me is having multiple pathways to receive that feedback. I mean, certainly you can have meetings and have people verbally share what their needs are, what their wants are, and articulate what they think might be helpful for them. But I also think having pathways where they can potentially share feedback anonymously so that it's not so much connected to the person and then a perception of that person, but you're still getting the information about what the needs are in order to be responsive to that as an organization. And so that's really the primary thing that comes to mind for me is having multiple pathways where people can share what it is that they may need. And also, I'll go back to something I said earlier, in that same bucket of feedback, allowing room for people to say what's working. Because what's working, we want to be able to do more of, but what's not working, we certainly want to be able to adjust. And so certainly verbal communication pathways, but also pathways that allow for people to anonymously share what their needs are. Still very important to have that diversity of communication options.
I love that idea of the multiple pathways. Faisal, do you have any thoughts on this one? Because it can be a challenge.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can be honest about your circumstances. You know, so when I think about people with physical or mental disabilities, if you are honest, what is the, you know, what's going to happen to you in the workplace? Are your opportunities going to become limited? Are people going to perceive you in a different way? You know, I come from a background, and it's probably a very British trait where you just have to get on with it, right? And you know, being at a disadvantage, you have to work twice as hard in order to just keep up. And so that's always the attitude that I've brought to the workforce, and it's not the right attitude. But I don't know we are in a position where we can do anything else in order to move forward. I really like the idea of Dr. Kenza's talking about anonymity. I think that works in a workforce that is very empathetic to people's needs. Certainly at Google, for example, you know, at Google we have, you know, a huge amount of effort in understanding people's differing needs and accommodating for them. But that's not always the case in any other organization. So, you know, this comes back to the point of resilience. If you don't have that outlet where you can talk about, you know, your own situation and how you need to accommodate your own situation, you need to develop your character in order to just be able to survive and possibly thrive in organizations. At least that's my experience. And that's why we see a lot of people with disabilities not progressing in the workforce, because they haven't had the opportunity to develop those that characteristics. So yeah, I don't really have a very positive message on how we can, you know, how we can accommodate, or how as an individual we can start communicating what we need.
No, I appreciate that. And we don't need you to be silver lining everything, right? Let's be real about it. I do think what can help sometimes is people like you talking about what's your experience to inspire others. I know I had to take a leave 3 or 4 years ago. I had to step out of work. I was having a nervous breakdown, or as I know now, burnout. And I was very, very concerned that by returning to work, having been very visible about having a mental health challenge, that people would, it was career suicide, and people would label me as fragile and not robust and make allowances for me and things like that. And maybe that happened a little bit, but not as much as I expected. And I've been able to do okay. And so I always tell other people that are in similar situations, like, it may not be what you think it's going to be. And I think by more of us talking about it like we are today, that can certainly help. But I appreciate what you said. Now, Mary Kay, when it comes to this idea of, you know, how can you express your needs? I have to say, I've worked with some ex-military and ex-law enforcement people who sometimes have some real challenges about talking to people in authority about what they need, right? Because just the way that things work in that system, it can be hard to open up. So what advice do you have?
Well, back to the trait of anonymity, we do have a way for all of the people in an organization to do a survey, and it's called a climate survey. What is the climate here like? So a new boss, a new leader coming in will do that kind of an assessment. So you will have an overall picture. Excuse me. We also have 360 ratings. So I am rated how well I'm doing as a leader by my boss, by my peers, and by my subordinates. Now, you have to take some of this with a grain of salt, since we all know sometimes how anonymous comments can be increasingly negative because they're not accountable. And there's also the perception on the side of those making the comments that nothing will change even if I do this. So I think we go back to that notion of you must be honest about, I'm going to do this survey because I want to know what you think, and I want to make changes if they're needed. And I think that commitment, so we talked about brand, but it's not just words, it's action. So I can say things all day long about what I want to do, but I have to prove it, and I have to do it.
Ooh, I love that everything that we've talked about today just comes back to telling people what you need and listening to what they need. So fundamental. Okay, quick round. Just tell me your top tip for operating successfully in a hybrid work world for those of us who have the privilege of doing that? Mary Kay, what's your top tip?
Keeping your personal balance and not becoming too focused on what I am not getting done because I'm here at home, or what I'm not getting done because I'm stuck in traffic, or I'm not doing enough in this area or that area. So I think it's keeping the sense of balance that we all gained or tried to gain throughout the last 2 years, and then keeping that as we go forward. Just keeping balance.
Thank you. Faisal.
I think practicing sincere self-promotion. We are constantly taught that we need to say the word we, because we produce things as a team. But when you're working remotely, and I said this before, your boss is somewhere in another country, how does he know what you're doing? You need to talk about what you have done as an individual. And so it's about practicing it sincerely. So what I mean by that, it's about providing evidence about what you have done. So don't be afraid to use the word I, and don't be afraid to back it up with what is it that you've done. And yeah, don't be afraid to promote what you've done in a remote world.
You are remarkable, Faisal. Dr. Kenza.
Two things. I would say flexibility and humility. Don't be afraid to do something new and different than the way it's been done. And recognize that we are all managing different circumstances, and we all need to respect that, and leave room for people's multiple and varied experiences with a level of humility as a part of that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kenza, I'm going to come back to you. We're opening up now to some of the Q&A that's been put in the chat. I think this one is right up your street. So our questioner says, how do you create a healthy space for work in your home while still maintaining work-life boundaries and balance?
Yeah, I think this is a real challenge, but I do think it's important to designate a space in your home that is for work. That's one of the recommendations that early on in the pandemic I really made to people is do not have work all over your home so that it feels like everywhere you go, you're in your office, right? So if you have the opportunity and have the space to designate a room, definitely do that. If not a room, just designate an area where that is going to be your workspace. Allow your work to be done there, and then allow the rest of your home to be your home. So I think creating some physical boundaries that denote that space, and really trying to be conscious of that space being designated for work so that the rest of your home can be home, I think is one of the strategies I would recommend.
It's a brilliant strategy. The next question is very personal for me because I have someone in my life for whom this is a big challenge. Faisal, working from home is considered a wonderful thing, as we've spoken about today, but it doesn't work for some. As a dyslexic person, verbal communication is crucial and written communication is more complex. It almost feels like we're not allowed to dislike working from home. How do we not alienate things and people in this conversation? And remember that it is a choice.
Yes, I think the word choice is absolutely critical here. So organizations need to provide a choice to people in the new hybrid world, right? So if individuals do feel like the need to go into the office, then that should be available to them. Technology is available as well to accommodate those who are working from home and those who are working remotely. So organizations need to invest in this type of technology. And I think the final thing is, education of the manager, as we alluded to earlier, of people's differing needs and disabilities.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Now, the next question resonates a lot for me. And I think it's interesting. The questioner says, you all have wonderful, positive stories about working from home. What about the uglier side of working from home, the isolation, the 24/7 parenting on top of your daily job, and how it impacted us as human beings? To the questioner, if we are giving you wonderful, positive stories, then please know that for every positive story, there's an ugly, negative one. Just 30 seconds ago, one of my kids slammed their bedroom door and I heard a toilet flush, and I was so close to screaming at them for doing that while I'm unmuted, but I regained my composure. This stuff is really hard, the impact it has on your relationships. If you live alone, the way that it can exacerbate feelings of loneliness. Do any of you have any thoughts on this particular one? Because I hope we're not looking at this whole situation today through rose-tinted glasses.
I do have a quick thought, and I think it's a very valid point because also working from home is not necessarily safe for some people, like the home environment is not. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that there are challenges in every circumstance. And so what I would say is we're talking about the ways in which our employer or the workplace can provide support in this scenario as we're trying to navigate this new next, whatever it is. But I also think it's important for us to be conscious of the ways in which we are attending to our own needs. So that may mean connecting with your social support system outside of work. It may mean seeking professional services and counseling services so that you have an outlet. I think we're talking about the ways in which work can offer support around your well-being, which is only one part of the puzzle. And so not neglecting the other things that we might be able to do to take care of ourselves, because the isolation is very real. Like, I'm a person who lives by myself, and I feel like there was a stretch where I didn't see very many people at all. And that's challenging and can be very damaging for your health. But that's when it's important to think about, what else do I need to do to focus on my wellness? What other things help me to feel connected beyond my engagements at work? And it may take energy, it takes effort, and like everything, it takes intention. But I think it really is about how we can foster wellness in other areas of our life in addition to work.
Thank you so much for saying that, Dr. Kenza, and especially for naming that not everyone feels safe and secure at home. Here's another question. Mary Kay, let's see how you think about this. How can you be confident in practicing empathy without it being seen as a weakness from others? I could talk for 7 hours about this one, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let you speak instead.
I'll take the other 7, because certainly I come from a world in which I am in a great minority. And that is the perception that, oh, you're soft, you're weak, you can't keep up. So it's a challenge that you would face daily. And I'm also not very tall. So when people would say to me, oh, so now you're a general, did you think it would be different? And I said, yes, I thought I'd be taller. But I practice in projecting that brand that's tough but fair and will listen. And make sure that if I make a decision that is a disciplinary one, no, we do publish these. We do let people know what happens if there is a disciplinary action that needs to be taken, not with a name necessarily, but just so you can see we do take action when things are wrong. And we do make an effort to make sure that everyone else knows what's acceptable in the workplace, whether at home or whether physical or virtual. And this is how we behave and act, and this is how we talk to each other in a work setting. So empathy is, I understand, not that I'm sorry for you. It's I understand, and if I don't understand, I want to. And I want you to help me understand so I can do the right thing.
Thank you. I'm aware that in this conversation we use terms like pandemic and virus and COVID without really kind of thinking about the fact that even those terms themselves can be hugely triggering for people who experience suffering and loss during what we've described as, in some cases, the best 2.5 years of our working life, right? So I think it's really important that we come to this final question. During COVID, I became an overnight caretaker for my mom who passed from cancer. Dealing with grief in the workplace is one of the hardest things I've ever wrestled with. Sometimes I break down in the most inopportune moments. Are there any tips for handling grief in the workplace? And Dr. Kenza, I do think that this is something that when everyone talks about the pandemic these days, we talk about it in the framework of like, oh, I'm so over this thing. But there has been significant loss and loss like this audience member is experiencing. So I'd love to come to you for handling grief. How do we do that?
So first, I'd like to extend my condolences on the loss. And this question is personal for me because I lost my father last August due to cancer. So during this pandemic, and I'm not going to provide rosy tips because I don't think they exist when you really talk about grief. I think I have come to understand grief as an oscillation between going back and forth between acceptance and recalibrating. And I think that's the reality of a grief journey, is that there will be some days that will feel easier to carry that grief. There will be other days that it feels incredibly difficult. And I think it's important to have grace with yourself. I think if there are safe people in your workplace who you can share that reality, your reality with, it would be important to do that so that they have an awareness, but beyond the awareness, so that they might be able to offer you support. Because I've also come to learn that it's very difficult to grieve in isolation. That is a very hard thing to do. And so if you can reach for the supports that may very well exist in your workplace and in other areas of your life, I think that's really important. But I think continuing to give yourself grace, allowing room for your feelings and your emotions when they come up is vitally important to the process. And I don't know if time heals all wounds, but I do think over time, our relationship to the grief changes. And so my hope is that as time continues to move, your relationship will change and you will be able to hold those moments differently when you are by yourself and with the support of others.
Thank you. It's extraordinarily comforting, especially when you're going through this yourself. So thank you for saying that. All right, everyone, we're going to finish, as we always do, with I Am Remarkable panels and workshops, with you just giving us a very short, why are you remarkable? I could answer for you because you're all incredible. Faisal, why are you remarkable?
Thank you. I am remarkable because despite my difficulties, I'm an incredibly happy person, and I am grateful for the life that I lead, and I have peace of mind. So that is why I'm remarkable.
And we've seen that today. Thank you. Mary Kay.
I think I am remarkable because once I stopped eating ice cream at the beginning of the pandemic and got control back of that impulse, I've been able to move on. I've been able to teach myself new things, and I've been able to acquire a new sense of drive and focus.
Dr. Kenza.
I am remarkable because I keep showing up and keep being curious and keep trying to leave the world a little bit better than I found it.
You are certainly all remarkable. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining. To everyone watching, please don't forget to tune in for the rest of the I Am Remarkable week. Later today, we have a live discussion with Tom Daly. So excited. And tomorrow we hear from Venus Williams and so much more. Thank you, remarkable panelists. And thank you everyone else for joining us. And I hope you enjoy what's left of I Am Remarkable Week 2022.